So, a huge news story broke last week about the Tales of series being pulled off the PS3. I guess now, if you want to get Tales of Xillia or Tales of Graces F, you have to buy them together. Tales of Symphonia collection has been pulled. You have to buy either Tales of Symphonia or Tales of Symphonia 2 separately. And then the big one is Tales of Xillia 2 is no longer there. To those making hay out of this, I say you're making a big deal out of nothing. Why? Well, the PS3 existed during a time that I kind of wish remained true in the industry. A time where digital goods and physical goods existed alongside from each other and were sold pretty much equally, with physical kind of beating the digital. The discs, with the exception of a few patches, usually contained a complete game. Because of this, there are probably hundreds of thousands of physical copies of these Tales games that can be traded. On top of that, Sony was going to shut down the PS3 store completely a few years ago. I never had a time to do it, but when the Wii and 3DS eShop closed, I wanted to do a video about it, why these stores closed. A lot of people are like, they just don't want to pay for the servers. No, that's not the problem. They still have to maintain the servers for several decades, probably. Why? Because people still want to download games. Hard drives will crash, and people will have to buy replacements and will want to re-download games. No, the real reasons eShops close are because of two things. First is security. As your gaming system gets old and obsolete, it will be harder for it to generate encryption that is up to snuff, and will be hard for Sony, Nintendo, or Microsoft to guarantee that your payment will make it to them without someone on the internet intercepting it and stealing your information. It's why even when Sony decided to keep the PS3 shop open, you can't make purchases through the PS3. You have to add money on a PS4 or on a website first, and then go to the PS3 to get your game. That way they can guarantee that your payment information stays secure. The second reason these close does affect the Tales series, and is probably the main culprit why the Tales of series got pulled. In order to keep the store open, you're going to have to keep licenses and deals in place and going to make sure that people are making their money when purchases happen. It's an extra hassle if it's on a platform few people access anymore, which is why I have a feeling this is what happened. Namco and Bandai and Sony don't want to take the time to hash up a deal to keep those games on an old, outdated platform anymore. And again, I come from the old generation when the old consoles were retired. Unless you were a collector willing to pay out the wazoo for a never-opened game, you were perfectly happy with the used open copy. And with Tales, those PS3 games, as of this recording, will only set you back $20 to $30 used. So again, this really isn't a big deal. So, what am I actually angry with Namco Bandai about? Or is it Bandai Namco? I forget which moniker they're using anymore. It's that they don't give a crap about preserving the Tales franchise at all. You take a look at Square Enix. If you're a PC user, you have access to pretty much all of the Final Fantasy mainstream titles. And even if you're on a console, you still get access to a good chunk of them as well. I know you can get the first 10 Final Fantasies pretty easy on all modern day systems, and on PC you have access to pretty much all of them. You go to Dragon Quest. Most Dragon Quest games are easy enough to access on mobile for dirt cheap. The latest one is the only one that's really available on all platforms when it comes to consoles. But really, when you think about Dragon Quest and the way you want to play Dragon Quest, it fits on the mobile. And the only Dragon Quest games that are really hard to find are Dragon Quest VII due to the eShop closing last year, and Dragon Quest IX due to the fact that it was made specifically for the DS. Square Enix has done a pretty good job of making sure those games stay afloat. Hell, even Star Oceans get re-released. Tales of, on the other hand, well, here is usually how I see the conversation going every time Namco Bandai announces they're interested in re-releasing classic Tales of games.
I got news. We're going to focus on re-releasing classic Tales of games.
Oh joy, so you're going to release games like Tales of Abyss, which was a great game that needs an HD remake, or Tales of Fantasia, which only got a poorly translated Game Boy Advance game here in the West, or Tales of Eternia or Destiny that I would probably have to sell body parts in order to afford. I'd love to be able to buy a collection for $30 or $40 with those games. I never got a chance to be able to purchase them when they were retail price because I didn't have a PlayStation at the time. I can't wait for the announcements.
Here you go. Announcing Tales of Symphonia re-release for the 50th time, and Tales of Vesperia for the 10th time.
Now, I don't hate those games. In fact, Vesperia is probably ranked up there as one of my favorite JRPGs of all time. However, as I kind of pointed out, they keep re-releasing those, and only releasing them while other Tales games seem to get stuck in the past as vaporware or being sold for ridiculously high prices in the secondary market. Now, going back to Square Enix, they know which Final Fantasy game is their bread and butter. Remakes and re-releases always start with 7, go through 12, and then back to the original games. But they do make a point of re-releasing those games every console generation or two. Bandai Namco seems to only want to put out Vesperia and Symphonia up and not worry about the fact that their older games in the series are pretty much vaporware at this point. This does piss me off. As of today, the Tales of franchise games that are easily made available are only Symphonia, the first game, Vesperia, Berseria, Zestiria, and Arise. The only games that have had re-releases are Abyss, which had a 3DS one, but no console or HD remake, and that's going to become harder to find since it was a 3DS game with that eShop closed. Symphonia, which gets released every couple of years. I think they're trying to beat Final Fantasy VII records when it comes to being re-released. Vesperia, which did have an HD release on the PS4 and can be found cheaply on Steam for $10 when it's on sale, which is like once every other month. And then finally, we had Tales of Fantasia, which had one Game Boy Advance port that landed in the United States. And I've heard that it was a butchered dub that botches vital information and can't be completed without a guide. It's not ridiculously expensive. If you want a standard use, will run you about $30 to $50. That said, Fantasia was also released on mobile a couple years ago. And before you run out to the App Store, it's no longer there. Why? Because rather than do what most publishers with common sense would do, release the game with the touchscreen controls and charge $5, $10, $15, maybe an upper market value of $20? No. Bandai Namco decided to release it as a free-to-play game and completely screw up the balancing, so you'd have to constantly buy healing items with real-world currency. Most gamers saw it for the ripoff that it was, and Bandai Namco pulled the plug on the servers after a handful of months, and now the game is no longer playable. So yeah, way to treat a game that started a huge JRPG franchise there, Bandai Namco. If you want to get upset, don't get upset that Sony and Bandai Namco pulled old games out of an aging service that very few people use anymore. Get angry that they never put them on places where gamers can easily buy and enjoy them, places like Steam or the PS4 or even the Switch. They are probably going to just sit on those games they just pulled and never re-release them because unless it's Symphonia, Namco Bandai doesn't give a crap the classic Tales of series and making sure that they're preserved and easily accessed. That is worth criticism and outrage for. Anyways, thanks for listening to this rant. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe and let me know what your thoughts are on this issue.